Hey, and welcome again to another edition of Where the Heck Are the Albans? And where the heck are the Albans? We are in Chicago, about a mile or so away from Wrigley Field. We are on Clark Street, and we are at Graceland Cemetery. And why would we be at a cemetery, you ask? Well, this was one of the first cemeteries in all of Chicago. And most of Chicago's founding fathers are buried here. So we thought we'd give you a little history of Chicago and show you some of the famous people and where they're buried here in Chicago. So let's go on. Come on.
Here's the map. Lots of people.
So what they do is they give you a map when you come in, and they show you where every famous person is buried here. And they tell you a little bit about them. And Vivi's holding two maps. This is the actual tree. It's the Arboretum. So this is also a national park. It's not just a cemetery. It's on the Register of Historic Places, and it's also registered as a national park.
Look at how many trees there are.
Some beautiful trees here.
They got some beautiful trees
and shrubs.
And they tell you all like where to locate each individual tree and what kind of tree it is.
Vivi's freaked out because it's not the dead ones you have to worry about.
That's right.
It's the ones that were buried alive.
That's right.
Which are probably already dead.
Ooh.
No.
And
They're
remember,
they're
Vivian,
dead.
it's not the cough that carries you off. It's the coffin they carry you off in. So here is the very first of the grave sites. This thing is huge. And this is the grave of Eli Williams. He settled in Chicago in 1833 when the population was only 200. He built a store on South Water Street, making his fortune in real estate and public utilities. And this is typical Victorian monument of a woman holding a cross up there, as you can see. We'll zoom in a little bit on her. Sorry. So, yes. So that is Williams.
Swink.
Okay, the next tomb on the list, it's probably one of the creepiest tombs, but at the same time just absolutely beautiful. The name of the tomb, or the sculpture on it, is called Eternal Silence, and it is the grave of Dexter Graves, of all names, Graves. But he was amongst the first 500 people to live in Chicago before it was actually incorporated, before it was a city. So he is one of the original founding fathers of Chicago. Ready for this thing? This thing is awesome. Be prepared. Here it comes.
Oh my God, the ice just opened.
I think Becky just freaked out Vivi just a little bit. But yes, so this is the Eternal Silence, the grave of Dexter Grave. Pretty darn cool. So the next grave is William LeBaron Jenney and his wife. And if you look at the grave itself, the way it is designed, it looks like steel structures and things like that. And the reason for that is because he was an architect and an engineer, and he was credited with inventing steel frame techniques, which led to the very first skyscraper ever built. And this is where he is buried.
No, they don't have a parking.
And but he did design the Humboldt, Garfield, and Douglas parks, and all the boulevards that connect them. How about that?
Like the Garfield Conservatory?
Yeah.
John Kinsey.
This is John Kinsey. So he was born December 23rd, 1763. So he was born before the United States was the
Declared
United States of America, before the signing of the Declaration of
Where they
Independence.
declared independence.
And he died June 6th of 1828. There is his original tombstone, but the city of Chicago actually gave him a new tombstone. And the reason being, he was the very first white settler, the very first permanent white settler in Chicago.
Oh, he also fought in the World War of 1812.
The War of 1812. And you know where part of the War of 1812 was fought, Vivian?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
Canada.
That's right. You were the only one that knew.
I know now.
Yeah. And another interesting thing about John Kinsey, he was originally buried at the Fort Dearborn Cemetery, but was later moved. He was actually moved a couple of different times. He was moved to the City Cemetery in 1835, and then later there was a development, and they moved all the graves out of all the graves out of the City Cemetery, and then he was moved here to Graceland. So he got moved twice due to development projects. How crazy is that? Becky was just saying that we don't know if they did anything famous or anything, but we like their last name. Louis and Elizabeth Nettlehorst.
I'm Lizzie Nettlehorst.
Okay, and here is the family of Daniel Elston. And Daniel Elston was a British merchant. He came to Chicago and manufactured soap, candles, and he erected a distillery and a brewery. He was a school inspector and an alderman. But he had a very sad experience as far as his children went. Here are the graves of his children. He lost a child at 5 years old. They lost a child at 1 year old. They lost a child at 7 years old. And the only child that made it to adulthood only lived to be 31 years old. He lived to be 65, but his wife lived to be almost 100, 96 years old.
All that tragedy.
And all that tragedy, yep.
Poor thing.
It's like the Lincolns.
Yeah, it's like the Lincolns.
Don't know whose grave this is, but look at how ornate at one time. Cross was made to look like logs, and then the flowers beneath it and the scroll. Let's see if we can make out some kind of a date here. 1870, I read. Didn't that look like 1870? 1870. Yeah. So.
Henrietta.
Henrietta.
But I can't read the last name.
Yeah. But quite a beautiful tombstone. And we also got a new camera. There's Becky with the new camera. Look at that.
It's my new camera.
It's her new camera. Yes.
I'm not sharing.
But we're going to see what kind of pictures it takes. So if we can do some still photography and put it on the blog too. But that thing also takes video. The only problem is that if it's pointed at me, I can't see myself. So.
And being so very vain that he is, he has to see himself. Hey, remember when Jerry Springer was going to run for office?
Yeah.
Right there, there's his political career.
Bartholomew, look at this. Like I said, I don't know what these people did or their history.
They had some money.
But they had some money, because look at this. I mean, that's huge. Margaret, John Frank, and Franz.
John Frank was only a year old.
He was only a year old.
Oh.
Well, that was the thing. You know, back in the 1800s, you see a lot of that.
Infant mortality rate.
Infant mortality rate was very high in the 17 and 1800s.
How are you?
Also, once again, no one
250.
famous that we know of, but
Why don't you take? Oh,
I wanted to take a look at some of these. Look at this. E.H. Haddock. Look at that beautiful, beautiful tombstone. It's gorgeous. And this one here for Fuller. Look at her. These are gorgeous. And here's another one. Look at this one. And this is for someone with the last name of Avery. Wow. I like this tombstone too. It's for Hunt. But look at it. It looks like kind of like a castle. Although the names are not recognizable anymore on here, they like their dogs. Look at that. There's the chapel, the cemetery. And this here is the tombstone for Jack Johnson. He was the first black heavyweight champion of the world, right there. But they took his title away for marrying white women. He was married to 3 different white women, and then he also upset the white supremacists by knocking out the Great White Hope champion, James Jeffries, at the time. What's going on?
So this is the best name ever.
The best name?
If I get another pet, which obviously you need one like a hole in my head.
Yeah.
But I will definitely going to name it Amos Pettibone.
Amos Pettibone. That is an awesome, awesome name. And the poor Adams family has had their tombstone broken. At least I think it's the Adams family.
It's just Adam.
It is Adam. Just the Adam family. Not Uncle Fester and Gomez. Not Adams. And to me, one of the best. I love this gravestone. Ready for this?
So good.
This is for Victor Lawson. Look at that thing. He is about, what would you say, almost 3 times the size of me, right?
Yeah. Here, I'll go stand by it.
Or maybe twice the size.
Plus he's standing on a pillar. So that doesn't count.
That guy is easily 3 Beckys tall.
Yeah. Above all things truth, beareth away the victory.
I don't know if we heard that. Try it one more time.
Above all things, truth beareth away the victory.
Beareth away the victories. And Victor Lawson, he was the publisher of the Chicago Daily News for over 29 years. And his business innovations included advancements in promotion, classified advertising, and syndication of news stories, serials, and comics. And the name of the they give names. It's called a Crusader to the gravestones. So very cool tombstone for someone named Hutchinson.
How's Pokemon Hut?
Look at these.
There's no Pokemon around.
No, live Pokemon.
These are,
Woo, birds.
they're supposed to represent stained glass in church.
That's a lot of squirrels.
Monsieur. So this is the gravesite of John Root. He was one of the designers of the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, However, he never saw it come to fruition. He passed away in 1891. But he was, one of his claims to fame is he built the world's tallest, at that time, skyscraper at 16 stories. It was the tallest office building with load-bearing walls. And he had a very famous partner called Burnham. And they were part of Burnham, or he was the other half of the Burnham and Root architecture company. Okay, and this is the pyramid grave of Peter Schoenhofen. And he was one of the first major breweries in Chicago. And the Schoenhofen Brewery in the Brewery District is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. I like the snake on the door handle. And the next grave site is of George Pullman, right here. He was renowned for his luxury rail cars. So if you've ever heard of Pullman trains and Pullman cars, this is his final resting place. Born in 1831, passed away in 1897. Mr. George M. Pullman revolutionized the way train travel worked. And somebody has lost their sunglasses. This is the tomb of Martin Ryerson. Ryerson was a lumber baron, but later made even more wealth in real estate in early Chicago. I was just told by a passerby that the design of this is called a mascabot. And it was actually, this gravesite was actually designed by Louis Sullivan. And Louis Sullivan is actually buried here at Graceland Cemetery. So we will go visit Louis Sullivan's gravesite in just a couple minutes. So this is the grave of Kimball. William Kimball, to be exact. And Kimball designed pianos and reed and pipe organ manufacturer. He was born in Maine and moved to Chicago in 1857 and acquired a music store. And in 1879 he began building pianos and organs. And he became so successful in Chicago that they named a street after him. Kimball Avenue. And one of the most influential architects, Chicagoan architect, was Louis Henry Sullivan. And he is buried here as well. And he is often called the prophet of modern architecture. So Louis Sullivan was the creator, one of the creators of Central Park, and he also was the influence of Frank Lloyd Wright.
He was a
Buried right
horticulture
here.
architect, right?
A what?
Horticulture architect.
I believe so, yes. And everything that he designed had a mixture of geometry and elaborate pockets and ornamentation in stone, wood, and terracotta.
He did the gorgeous Japanese gardens over by the Museum of Science and Industry.
Yes, that's right. He designed that for the World's Fair as well. And if you are familiar with the Chicago Theater District, one of the most popular of the theaters is the Goodman Theater. And Goodman is buried right here until the day breaks and the shadows flee away. Goodman. And if you saw our vlog of the scavenger hunt, we had to go into the Palmer house, which was the Palmer Hotel. In life, Palmer wanted to be the best. And he said, in death, I still want to be the best. So he built on the highest point of the cemetery and the biggest monument. There lies the Palmers. And Mr. Potter Palmer did not want to be buried. So therefore, their coffins sit right behind those stone walls. Mr. Potter Palmer and his wife, Bertha Palmer. But he picked this spot specifically when he was still alive for the beautiful view of the lagoon. And this is the grave spot of Wacker, Charles Wacker. And Wacker, he was actually born in Chicago. He was a businessman and a philanthropist. And he was vice chairman of the General Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago and chairman of the Chicago Plan Commission.
And if you saw Blues Brothers,
This
is definitely Lower Wacker Drive.
Yeah, this is definitely Lower Wacker Drive. He also has a street named after him. Upper Wacker and Lower Wacker Drive in Chicago. So this bridge crosses over the lagoon. Over to Daniel Burnham's memorial. Now, this is not his gravesite. Both Daniel and Margaret were cremated and their ashes were scattered in the lagoon. I think I kind of forgot to mention who Daniel Burnham was. Daniel Burnham was one of the most influential, I can't even talk today. He was one of the most influential architects of his time in the mid to late 1800s. He was the main designer of the Columbian expedition of the 1893 World's Fair. But a lot of the buildings and designs that you see in Chicagoland were designed by Burnham. So truly,
Were they
one of the fathers of...
Were Burnham and Root partners?
Yes, they were.
Okay, that's
Yes.
what I thought.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I read that book.
Yeah, yeah. You can read actually all about him in the book Devil in the White City. It's actually a very great book. It tells the history of the World's Fair, talks all about Burnham and Root, but it also is the story of the very first serial killer, H.H. Holmes, in Chicago, and in the United States. Very interesting, very fascinating book.
It's written by Eric Larson, and it's going to be a movie soon. And I think, shoot, what's his name? Leonardo DiCaprio is going to play the serial killer.
Excellent.
I think so, but
We'll see.
I wasn't part of the show, so
You weren't one of the writers?
no. They didn't ask my opinion either. So
So we saw Sullivan's gravesite. This is the gravesite of the Getty tomb, of Getty. It was erected in 1890 to carry Elsa Getty. She is the deceased wife of Henry Harrison Getty, who was a prominent Chicago businessman and one of Sullivan's, and this is considered to be one of Sullivan's finest works. Sullivan designed this tomb as well. And just as on the buildings, even in the cemetery, if Chicago gives you a landmark, you get a plaque. And it's for the Getty tomb, Adler and Sullivan Architects. And as we come around this corner, one of the most famous people to be buried here. If you know anything about hot dogs, Chicago hot dogs, what kind of kid eats Armour hot dogs? And here is where Philip Armour, creator of Armour hot dogs, which are still around today, is buried. Born 1832, died in 1901.
fat kids, skinny kids, kids who climb on rocks, tough kids, sissy kids, even kids with chicken pox love hot dogs. Armour hot dogs. The dogs kids love to bite.
Good job, Beck.
I remember it.
Looking across the lagoon, you can see Kimball over there. And there's Palmer Memorial. Just such an awesome
14.
and gorgeous cemetery. And one of my favorite Cubs players is buried here. He just passed away 2 years ago. Didn't get to see the Cubs win the World Series, unfortunately. Mr. Let's Play 2, number 14, Ernie Banks. Just caught my eye. Bruce Goff. He's an architect. But look at that. That's a beautiful headstone. You wouldn't know it by the looks of these very modest tombstones. But in here is Cyrus McCormick. We just need to find him. Here he is, Cyrus McCormick. Cyrus McCormick was the inventor of the very first commercially successful reaper, a horse-drawn machine to harvest wheat. And his invention was such a great success that McCormick Center is named after him. This beautiful grave marker sculpture is the grave of Marshall Field. Something must be wrong with the motors because normally this pool sprays water.
That turned on.
It's a little fountain. Just might not be turned on. But the architect that designed his gravestone is also the same architect that did the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. So Marshall Field, of course, was one of the most successful businessmen, not just in Chicago, but in all the world. And of course, you saw in our scavenger hunt, Meet Me Under the Clock of Marshall Fields. And just to note, his entire family is buried here. right down to Marshall Field the Fourth, who just passed away in 1965, not all that long ago. But here is Marshall Field himself. A few babies, unfortunately. And Marshall Field Jr. Marshall Field Jr. Founded the Chicago Sun-Times. Just so you know. And this must be from a very German family, because here is the Vater and the Mutter. The father and the mother. So this is Inez Clark. For years, she was unidentified until finally they discovered her records and identified her as Inez. There is a rumor that she was actually hit by lightning when she was locked outside of her house, and that is why she is her marker has an umbrella. But on stormy nights, this whole case fills with fog, and it is said that her graves marker here disappears. But whenever it rains, it is a fact that this does fill up with a light fog. Ah, the weird and the macabre. On top of her grave is a praying mantis. Can you see him there? Hello, Mr. Praying Mantis. Just as I am. And sitting over here is a baseball that says Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, and Detroit. And it belongs to a Mr. William Hulbert. Boston, Providence, Worcester, Troy, National League. So, William Hulbert, he was part owner of the Chicago White Stockings, who later became, or the White Stockings became, the Chicago Cubs. He founded the National League in 1876. And now we are at the gravesite of Alan Pinkerton. Pinkerton is known as the very first undercover agent ever.
He's a foe to crime.
That's right. But if you ever heard of Pinkerton's Men, which is basically almost like kind of like not a secret service, but like an FBI type thing, and detectives, the Pinkerton detectives. They are named after Mr. Alan Pinkerton. A friend to honesty and a foe to crime. So yeah, so in Scotland, if you hear the word Pinkerton Detective Agency, this is who it's named after. Buried here in Chicago, Illinois. So I love cemeteries. I love the history of cemeteries. I guess it kind of sounds weird, but I love the fact that here are people of history, founding fathers of Chicago, people of great historical purpose, and oddly enough, I'm only 6 feet away from them. So in a way, kind of a little eerie maybe, but I think it's fascinating at this exact same time. So that's really about it for Graceland Cemetery. They do have other tours. Like I said, they got the tree tours, part 1 and part 2. You can come and look at the different trees. And don't forget this, I mean, this is open all year round, all seasons. So you can drive through, take the tour, you can download a map. Otherwise, you can go to the office if the office is open, and you can get yourself a map. And it will tell you where all these people are. I know for a fact we walked quite a ways, more than a mile today, zigzagging through the roads and the graves. But fascinating day nonetheless. So if you like what you saw, give us a big old thumbs up. Hey, where is everybody? There's everybody. Give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe down below. And if you were wondering where Emerson is, she went camping this weekend with a friend. So Emerson did not join us on this one. Yes, glamping. They call it glamping because it really wasn't camping. They had a trailer with a bathroom in it, a microwave, stove, sink, things like that. But nevertheless, they called it camping. So we will see you guys next time on Where the Heck Are the Albans? Bye!
Bye.